Chapter 5 The Smashed Temples. I noticed the prettiness of the morning as the gentle strains of The East is Red sounded through the loudspeaker at dawn the next day. The early light had soothed away the unhappiness of the day before, and Liang Weiping was singing as she got dressed. Father also seemed much calmer when he returned from the dining hall with a rice gruel and mantou. He had run into a few fellow reporter who was similarly optimistic after hearing the broadcast. He left for work carrying the pile of books and his thick self-criticism, and Liang Weiping went off for the meetings at her school. In fact, Father would never receive a shred of the protection spoken of in the 16 articles any more than any of the other intellectuals would. But for a few hours, ignorance was bliss, and I settled down happily with my father's copy of the quotations, ready once again to enter the ranks of the revolution. At about 9 a.m., two men in huge straw hats came to the house. They smiled in a very friendly way and asked if this was the Liang family home. So I invited them to come in and sit down. The older one, a short man without much hair, made the introductions. He called me Little Liang, as an older adult to a younger one, and not child, the way most people still did, so I felt very proud. My name is Jiang, and I'm from the rural department of the Provincial Party Committee. This is Comrade Du from the Forestry Bureau. We've been sent from the 5 Lakes and 4 Seas for a common revolutionary purpose. We're on the party's work team. I recognized the quotation from Chairman Mao and smiled and nodded as I poured water for their tea. Du had picked up my notebook from the table and was leafing quickly through it. I see you've been studying your Chairman Mao. You're quite a fine young fellow, aren't you? Your notes are wonderful. I knew he hadn't looked at him carefully, so I suddenly felt suspicious, but his next words warmed me up again. Do you know that Chairman Mao calls people of your age? He calls you the morning sunlight. He pointed to the ray of light illuminating my father's brush and ink. Just like that, the hope of the revolution. You have a bright future as a revolutionary pathbreaker. The cartoons aren't so bad either, man. His words gave me great comfort, as if we were restoring the power of the revolution to me after all. They were treating me so differently than the worker Zhou Sa-wu had the day before. Maybe they knew about how we'd been kicked out of the group and had criticized Zhou and my classmates. Now they had come to tell me I could join again. I felt wonderful, like a soldier waiting for his assignment. Jiang spoke this time, fanning himself with his hat, his voice soft. Xiaoliang, it takes great courage to rebel. You need to take concrete action according to the practical situation. He looked at me intently to see if I had understood this meaning, but I felt confused and shifted uneasily in my seat. Du said, Let's get everything out in the open, Xiaoliang. What do you think of the posters about your father? His question was too abrupt, and it caught me off guard. I didn't know how to answer. Instinctively, I found Father's own words. We should believe the party and believe Chairman Mao. My guests broke into smiles, and Du patted me on the shoulder. Right. And in specific terms, you should believe us, because Chairman Mao sent us here as a work team. If you have anything to say, you can tell us freely. And if Chairman Mao wants to communicate something to the people, he can do it through us. So you should trust us. We should work together. Jiang took over. The most important thing you can do now is help your father. Help him recognize his faults. Be courageous. Criticize him so he can change himself. I was stunned. I hadn't realized that returning to the revolutionary ranks would mean this. I said, I wouldn't know how. First, go look at the posters again to get an idea of what to say. Then you can write your own material and bring it to us in the office this afternoon when you're finished. We'll be waiting for you. But I don't know how to write anything like that, I protested feebly. Jiang thought for a moment and then smiled. Just call it Expose and Criticize My Father, Liang Shan. That would be a good title. You're a fine young man, really devoted to Chairman Mao. We're proud of you." They stood up, putting on their big hats. "Well, go then. We're very busy. See you this afternoon." They shook my hand warmly and disappeared out the door. I felt very sad. How could I criticize my father when I knew how loyal he was? I knew without having to think about it that I could never write anything. Suddenly, I had lost all interest in the revolution, and when father came home at noon, I didn't tell him about the work team's visit. I figured that maybe because I was only 12, and they would just forget about me and let the matter drop. I envied my sisters for being away at school and avoiding the whole problem. But things were not so easy as I had hoped. At noon the next day, the loudspeaker announced that at 2 p.m., all members of families of the people employed at the newspaper were to meet in the auditorium with the work team. One person was to remain on duty for every 7 or 8 buildings. Everyone else was to show up without exception. Nearly everyone who could be classified as a family member was retired or a schoolchild. That hot afternoon, the old ladies appeared with their canes and little bamboo stools. Babies strapped to their backs. Old gentlemen with no teeth limped slowly under the shade of black umbrellas. Young boys and girls hurried through the poster maze and clattered up the stairs to the auditorium, holding, if they were lucky, copies of the quotations of Chairman Mao in their sweaty little hands. Those who never had reason to leave their own courtyards had to pass through the debris of political struggle, and even those who couldn't read were forced to confront a Hunan daily transformed. The auditorium was on the top floor of the office building, a rather elegant modern room reserved for meetings in which none of us had ever been important enough to participate. Now we squeezed into the seats and spilled into the aisles, fanning ourselves uselessly against the August heat. A short, fat man carrying a black fan came to the podium and almost lost his audience when he ordered the ceiling fans turned on. Everyone instantly started upward in awe and admiration. Keep order! Pay attention!" he cried, and gradually managed to attract attention. "We need to be as well trained as the People's Liberation Army. To participate in this meeting, everyone must have a deep proletarian feeling for Chairman Mao and the party. There is to be no talking, moving around, or leaving early. If children cry, they may be taken from the meeting room, but they must be brought back again as soon as they are quiet. There is to be no reading or embroidery. Those of you with education must take notes. First, we will study the 16 articles. Then we will talk about what contribution you can make to the Cultural Revolution." Someone else came up and read the document from beginning to end, as we had heard it over the radio. A baby cried and was removed. Children, normally mischievous, sat silent, and only the electric hum of the fans accompanied the drone of the man at the podium. This is the first of such meetings we had ever attended, and we weren't quite sure what to make of it. Then the short, fat man came back and spoke. "The great proletarian cultural revolution has made a good start in our unit, but for it to be the mass movement, it should be everyone must participate, and family members mustn't lag behind. We must launch a great revolutionary competition to see who can have the deepest feeling for Chairman Mao, who can have the greatest political awareness, who can be most active in the movement, who can hold the firmest political position. You must be clear about certain questions. If someone in your family is criticized, this is a good thing, because those comrades are being saved from falling into the quicksand of capitalism. Unfortunately, some people don't fully understand the Cultural Revolution, so they don't welcome such criticism. While this is understandable, it is wrong. The thought of such people has not kept pace with the recent events, so today we must mobilize each other to enter the ranks of the revolution. Our work teams have already spoken with certain family members, and many have written materials and deserve great praise, but others have dragged their feet. Today we give them another chance. For now, we won't shame them publicly by mentioning their names, but if they don't join us soon, we'll have no other choice but to criticize them openly for obstructing the great proletarian cultural revolution." He paused and scanned the room as if seeking out the laggards. I sank into my chair and tried to look inconspicuous. "All right," he said finally. "This part of the meeting is over. The work team asks all family members to go out and read the big character posters. The students should read them aloud to the old people who can't read, so everyone will know their meaning. Next time you'll come to look at them on your own, to further your own revolutionary educations. That's all." It was too hot, and there were too many posters. I avoided the section where fathers were hung. A lot of the babies were crying, and when the old ladies got tired, they sat down on their little hand stools and fanned themselves. The crowd was a lively one, not yet soured, but I felt exhausted. At last, work team members told us over the megaphones that we could go home. Father returned for dinner. He had been reading big character posters and writing self-criticisms all day. He took his bowl of rice, fatty pork, and sweet potato noodles and brought it to his lips with a sigh. I had already devoured most of my food when Liang Weiping announced, "Well, it looks like we're putting up our own big character posters now." Father lowered his bowl. "What do you mean?" "The work team wants Liang Heng to write posters about you." No, I interrupted. "Not posters, they just want me to turn in some materials." "What's this all about?" Father demanded. "I don't want to talk about it," I said. Father smiled bitterly. "You don't trust me, huh? You think I'll try to keep you from writing anything?" Actually, it was I who didn't want to write anything. I told him about the visit and the meeting and how the work team had threatened to criticize anyone who didn't cooperate. "How can you be so foolish?" Father asked in alarm. "Write something quickly. Turn something in right away." I did not understand what he meant, but Liang Weiping was quicker than I. Yes, you have to write something, or they'll think Father wouldn't let you, and things will be even worse for him." I don't know what to write," I protested. "Just write that you don't know, then, but you have to hand in something." Liang Weiping had taken the bowls into the kitchen, and her voice was shrill over the sound of running water. Then she came out and picked up her school bag. "I have to go back to school for another meeting," she said. "You'd better write something." I sat at the table staring out the window at the sunset. Criticizing my father wouldn't be easy the way criticizing my teachers had been. I lived with him and knew his thoughts. I felt a hand on my shoulder, and Father sighed. There are too many things in this world that are just hard to make sense out of. "What?" I looked up. He retracted his words hastily. Nothing. I was thinking about the sunset." He took some mosquito incense out of a drawer for me and lit it, and then disappeared into the next room to write himself his nightly self-criticism. I traced out the words expose and criticize my father Liang Shan. Then I started at the tidy black characters and felt myself close to tears. But by the end of the evening, I had managed to fill the page, drawing on the family's discussion the night we listened to the 16 articles on the radio together. I went to bed miserably. Early the next morning, I took my material to the work team. Du was at the desk and looked at me ironically. All the warmth of our earlier meeting was gone. He held out his hand for the paper. "So you had to bow to the situation, didn't you? Next time, judge it earlier and more accurately, and you will save yourself a lot of trouble." That was my first lesson in self-protection in modern society. While the criticism movement was getting started, college and middle school students were forming the first Red Guard units. They were relatively conservative, protecting most of the party leaders, if only because those leaders were also the Red Guard's fathers and mothers. Fiercely proud of their good backgrounds, so much so that they would allow only students descended from the 5 red types: revolutionary cadres, revolutionary martyrs, revolutionary soldiers, workers, and poor and lower middle peasants to join them. These first Red Guards focused their attack on the so-called 5 black types: landlords, rich peasants, counter-revolutionaries, bad elements, and rightist. Their slogan was, "If the father is a hero, the son is a brave man. If the father is a reactionary, the son is a bastard, thus settling the question of class standing for all eternity. The irony of the situation was that these sons and daughters of high-ranking cadres were creating a movement that would soon double back to attack their parents. They themselves would become the victims of their own revolutionary fervor. In Changsha, the initial group was called the Red Defense Guards, and by an incredible fluke, Liang managed to become a member. Because there were so many cadres children at the #1 middle school, that school was among the first to become organized, and because Liang took part in the organizing work, the issue of her righteous parents was temporarily overlooked. She had finally achieved her long-coveted revolutionary glory. She must have renounced our mother with extraordinary enthusiasm in order to pass muster. Liang rarely came home, of course. We got most of our news of her through Liang Weiping, who moved about a good deal and saw her through school activities. One day, Liang Weiping returned in a state of great excitement. Liang had told her that the party secretary of the #1 middle school had denounced herself for betraying the communists to the KMT before liberation. And then he had hanged himself in the cellar where he was being kept a prisoner. A real class enemy exposed. The other news was that a lot of students were preparing to go to Peking to report to Mao's wife, Jiang Qing, and the other members of the Cultural Revolutionary Directorate. There was an off chance that they might be able to see Chairman Mao himself. The August 18 Hunan Daily was a red ink issue. It told of thousands of Red Guards gathering in Tiananmen Square, and Chairman Mao making an appearance and allowing a student to pin the Red Guard armband on his sleeve. Great numbers of middle school and college students had been permitted to mount the tower and shake hands with him, and it was plain that a broad new movement had been launched. We felt the first echoes in Changsha soon after. The representatives of the first Peking Red Guard group, the United Action Committee, arrived from the capital, bringing with them a first taste of the violence that would spread throughout China. They were staying at the luxurious government hotel near the Martyrs Park when they got into a fight with one of the hotel workers, a boy whose grandfather had been a landlord before liberation. I don't know the details of the argument, but they nearly beat him to death with their wide leather belts. What amazed me was how the party committee reacted to this episode. There was a glass propaganda case by the front gate of the newspaper, which usually held exhibits on factory production, little friends dancing in nursery school, or instructive displays on the life of the model soldier Lei Feng. Now appeared photographs of the violence, hailed as revolutionary heroism. Changsha wasn't the first practice ground for this new breed of terrorism, of course, but the incident was the first most of us had heard of. Later, such events would become all too familiar. After their visit, the local movement spread beyond the Red Defense Guards. Although membership was still restricted to the 5 red types, the groups usually choose their names from some poem or quotation from Chairman Mao. So we had the Jinggang Mountain group, the East is Red group, the Chase the Exhausted Enemy group, the Struggle with the Waves in the Middle of the Current group, and many more. We got used to seeing the Red Guard costume, People's Liberation Army, green pants and jacket, a wide leather belt, and the prized bright red armband. Liang Weiping wanted to join, but because of our mother, she was told she could only work at school, which had been converted into a Red Guard hospitality station, a kind of inn for Red Guards from other provinces. She was crushed, but glad to be allowed to help at all. They kept her very busy, boiling water and pushing decks around to make beds for all the guests. The 16 articles has stressed the need to criticize the 4 olds: old thought, old customs, old culture, and old morals, and this was the thrust of the Red Guard's first campaign. The immediate and most visible result was that the names of everything familiar changed overnight. Suddenly, Heaven and Heart Park became People's Park. Cai Yi Road, named from a hero of the Revolution of 1911, became Red Guard Road. The northern station where I had pushed cards for a day was now to be found on Combat Revisionism Street, and a shop named after its pre-liberation capitalist proprietor became the East is Red food store. Changsha quickly acquired a Red Guard theater, a Shaoshan Road, a People's Road, and an Oppose Imperialism Road. All this was extremely confusing, especially for the old people, and everybody was always getting off at the wrong bus stop and getting lost. To make matters even worse, the ticket sellers on the buses were too busy giving instructive readings from the quotations of Chairman Mao between stops to have much time to help straighten out the mess. Of course, there were some people who never did get used to it, and to this day they live on the ghosts of streets whose names today's young people had never heard of. 10 years later, an old man asked me where Education Road was, but I had no idea there was such a street. Then he asked a nearby policeman, but he didn't know either. More and more people got involved, forming a circle around him and telling him that he was mistaken, that there was no such street. Finally, he protested. How could I be wrong? Changsha already had the street by the 37th year of the Republic of China. Everybody burst out laughing. He was using the obsolete pre-liberation system of counting years dating from the 1911 revolution. People changed their own names too. One of my classmates rejected his old name, Wen Jianping, Wen established peace, in favor of Wen Zaofan, Wen rebel. My neighbor Li Ling, Li Forest, called herself Li Zihong, Li read from birth, to advertise her good background. Cao Caifa, Cao make money, became Cao Wei Dong, Cao protect the East. Another friend got rid of the Chiang in his name because it was the same as Chiang Kai-shek's. So there was a lot of excitement in the city, but at home it was very quiet. Father spent every evening at his writing, and Liang Weiping and I never felt much like talking. We were sitting silently like this, reading and writing, on the hot night that Liang Fang came home. I hadn't seen her in more than 3 weeks. She was a changed person. She looked splendid, never better, strong and slim, where her leather belt clinched in her waist. Her green army-style uniform, with its cap of authority over her short braids, gave her an air of fashion and confidence I had never seen in her before. She looked a real soldier, and I sat up straight and stared with big eyes, unsure whether or not she was really my sister. My desire for my own Red Guard uniform dated from that instant. Father emerged when he heard voices and looked glad to see Liang Fang. How have things been going? He asked. We haven't seen you in a long time. The situation is excellent, she answered in the language of revolution. We're washing away all the dirty water, but I never sleep. Every night we're out making search raids. What's a search raid? I asked. You know, before you've been on a search raid, you have no idea what's really going on in this society. People have been hiding all sorts of things. Counter-revolutionary materials, pre-liberation reactionary artworks, gold, jade, silver, jewelry. The trappings of feudalism, capitalism, revisionism are everywhere. My father looked surprised. What do you care about those kind of things? But Liang Fang was too involved in her story to answer. We have a schedule to follow. Each night we go to a series of homes and go through every book, every page, to see if there's any anti-party material. It's an incredible amount of work. We have to check all the boxes and suitcases for false bottoms and sometimes pull up the floors to see if anything's been hidden underneath. Liang Weiping brought her basin of hot water and a towel to clean her face, and when she stood up to wash, her eyes fell on a traditional painting of a horse by Heng. What you doing with that? Heng was denounced ages ago. You people are too careless. She went over to take it down, but father's voice stopped her. What's wrong with it? That has nothing to do with any capitalism, revisionism line. Leave it be. She said, but you don't know what's been going on. It's not just a question of paintings, but of all the old things. Where do you think I am all day? I was up on the Yelu mountain with the Hunan University students, trying to get rid of all these old monuments and pavilions, and it wasn't an easy job either. Half the stuff's made of stone. We had to use knives and axes to dig out the inscriptions. These stinking poetries of the feudal society. But it's all gone now, or boarded shut. Can we still go play there? I asked. Well, she hesitated. Maybe for now you'd better not. People might think you were there for the wrong reasons. Father had found his voice. How could you destroy the old poetry carved in the temples and pavilions? What kind of behavior is that? What kind of behavior? Revolutionary action, that's what. The Hengyang District Red Guards have already destroyed all the temples on the southern peak of the Heng Mountain. So much for the sacred mountain. When I heard the words southern peak, I remembered that Waipo had told me how people went to burn incense, setting out from their doorsteps and kneeling every few paces all the way to the mountaintop. If Waipo knew the temples were gone, what would she do? Who would light incense for her now? Who asked you to do these things? Father demanded. Father, she answered with exaggerated patience, you really don't understand the Cultural Revolution at all, do you? We have to get rid of the four olds. That includes everything old. Don't you even read your own newspaper? You'd better keep up with things or you'll be in trouble. Father protested. It's one thing to get rid of old customs and ideas, and another to go around and smash at ancient temples. Why are they good? They just trick people, make them superstitious. They're a bad influence on the young people. Whoever influenced you? Father demanded. No one in your whole life ever asked you to believe in any Buddhas. Liang didn't have an answer, which irritated her. Well, anyway, they're all old things. Why aren't there revolutionary poems, Chairman Mao's poems, statues of people's heroes, workers, peasants, and soldiers? Father despaired. It's all over. China's old culture is being destroyed. He hit the table with his finger for emphasis. Such precious historical treasures, all those symbols of China's ancient culture, they're gone in only a few days. You've wronged your ancestors. Liang lost her temper. No wonder people criticize you. You just keep following the revisionist line and refuse to change, don't you? Father said angrily. All right, I don't care then, but I forbid you to touch that picture. The quarrel ended on that note as Father went into his inner room and closed the door. I couldn't figure out who was right, but I knew that Chairman Mao supported the Red Guards, so I said to Liang forget it, why don't you? It's hard for him to give up his ideas. Why don't we talk about something more pleasant? But Liang was angry and didn't want to talk. I just came home to get a good night's sleep anyway, she said. What a family. She walked over, laid down on the larger bed, and was asleep almost immediately. The difficulty